My name's Ethan. And yeah, I've heard it all before. You're too old for this. But they don't get it. The Grinch isn't just a character to me. He's something more. I mean, I'm a sucker for this stuff. Posters, toys, collector's items, you name it, I have it. My house is literally like the Grinch exploded in it. People tend to think it's quirky or weird, but they don't see what I see. The Grinch was clever and misunderstood, a genius. But things went sideways last Christmas. It started in a flea market. Just walking through, scouring over all the tables for any Grinch, I saw it. An old dusty Grinch toy perched atop some wonky table. It was unlike any other I've ever seen though. Fur matted, green plotting instead of richly vibrant, and eyes. And glow kinda almost like they're breathing in that dim light. When I picked it up, it was warm. Not warm like it sat out in the sun all day. Warm like if it were alive. My chest constricted, and I reassured myself that it was just my excitement. How much? I asked the seller. The old man behind the table didn't even look at me.
Take it, he muttered. No charge.
I should have walked away, but I didn't. I sat the toy on my shelf, right in the middle of my Grinch collection. It was perfect there. Too perfect. As I gazed at it, a creeping, crawling feeling went up my spine as if it looked back at me. Then the whisper started. I thought it might just be the wind, or perhaps the neighbors, but it was whispered inside the house. Faint, soft, just out of earshot. They seemed to come from nowhere, and from everywhere, and it only got worse. Every time I passed a mirror, my reflection seemed off. My nose looked longer, my cheeks hollow. One night, I swore I saw my face twist into a Grinch-like grin before snapping back to normal. The decorations around my house seemed different somehow. The Grinches on my shelves seemed to shift when I wasn't paying attention. Their smiles grew thinner, their eyes deeper. I tried to think myself into agreement with my mind, but the fact remained within me. I knew. And then the dreams came. I saw him every night. The Grinch. But it was not the playful mischievousness of his daily endeavors. He was taller and leaner, his green fur darker, more patchy. His grin went on too long, and jagged and sharp were his teeth. I envisioned him standing at the foot of my bed. He watched me, whispering things I couldn't understand.
Follow me,
he said one night in a deep guttural voice. I wake up drenched in sweat with my heart racing. That was when I started digging. I needed answers. I spent days researching and surfing all obscure forums and old books dedicated to Christmas folklore. And that's how I found the legend of a cursed Grinch toy. According to the stories, it wasn't only a collector's item, it was a trap. It pulled people in, feeding on their obsession, slowly turning them into what they so admired. Something inside me didn't want to believe it, but the signs were there. Whispers, distorted reflections, and dreams. I tried to eliminate the toy. I threw it in the trash, but the next morning, there it was back on my shelf. I burned it, but it came back. Its fur singed, its grin even wider. I was losing my mind. Christmas Eve. That's when I finally saw myself. This time, however, it wasn't me. The face in the mirror was green, and its grin was stitched into its cheeks. I screamed and punched the glass, but the image didn't break. That's when I realized I wasn't just seeing the Grinch, I was becoming him. The next thing I remember is standing in my bathroom staring into the mirror with a knife in my hand. Blood was dripping from my cheeks because I carved out a grin. All I can recall is looking back at an awful distorted grin. Now I'm here, locked away in this mental institution. They say I'm dangerous, that I hurt myself and scared my neighbors, but they don't understand. The Grinch is real. He's here. I can hear the guards talking about me every now and then.
Poor guy,
one of them said.
His obsession destroyed him.
The other replied, yeah, who carves a grin into their own face? They don't know what I know. They can laugh all they want. But every night, I see him, the Grinch, standing in the corner of my room, his grin wider than ever. He's waiting. For what, I don't know. But I can feel it. He's not done with me yet. I visited my parents for Christmas last year. It had been snowing since October, so my dad helped me switch over to winter tires over a month earlier. That made me think I didn't have to worry much about road conditions. My family and I had a wonderful Christmas together, but I had plans to go on vacation with a friend the following day. Our flight was scheduled for that afternoon. I left in the early morning when it was still dark out, so I could have ample time to prepare for the trip and arrive at the airport. Unfortunately, I hadn't paid enough attention to how much snow had fallen the previous night. I quickly realized that the winter tires alone might not cut it, but I was determined to get home. Once there, I could just get a ride. Unfortunately, there was a dark and lonely 20 miles between me and my destination. I pressed on at a cautious speed. Everything seemed fine until I crossed over a small bridge. Then, out of nowhere, I hit a patch of black ice. My car rotated one way and started sliding the other way, completely out of my control. I rammed into a pile of snow underneath. But thankfully, I wasn't going fast enough to cause any damage to the car. On the other hand, the snow caved in under one tire, causing me to get stuck. I tried not to panic. I had never had to get myself out of snow before, but my dad told me how. When I stepped out, though, all my confidence was blown away by the brutally cold wind and the realization that I was completely alone on that stretch of road. When I refocused, I grabbed all the floor mats from the back seat and the box of cat litter from the trunk. I got on my hands and knees and cleared a path for my back tires, packing down the softer snow into hard ice. I laid down the litter with mats and tried as hard as I could to cram them under the tires. I was working under the light of a single flashlight, feeling like I was on a fast track to hypothermia as my fingers started to get stiff and my face went numb. Just as I was ready to give it a try, I saw a pair of headlights approaching behind me. I flagged them down, trying to warn them about the ice. They seemed to go over it with no problem, and as they pulled over next to me, I saw that they had chains on their tires. It was another larger SUV, driven by a scruffy middle-aged man with gloves on who offered to help. I declined, saying I was already taking care of it. But then he took a glance at my setup and said there was no chance of that working. He hopped out of his car, revealing a stained jacket over a large gut, saying he'd help tow me from the ditch. I told him again that I had things handled, but he glared at me, demeaning. He said a little lady like me couldn't handle anything on her own, and that I was no good to anyone if I froze to death. I was offended. My teeth were chattering so much I couldn't go off on him for being such a chauvinist, and what I could get out was lost in the wind. All I could do was watch him pop open his trunk and pull out a long chain, which he looped through an attachment point under the front bumper of my car. Then, he told me to kneel there and hold it while he grabbed something to lock it in place. I managed to ask him why he didn't just tie the chain in a knot, but he snapped at me asking if I knew anything about towing cars. I tried to snap back by saying I never asked him for a tow, but he pointed at my floor mats and cat litter and said it was the stupidest, most brain-dead method of getting out of snow. If he left, he said I'd be stuck there all morning until the snowplows came to bury me. In the freezing cold, looking at my handiwork once again, I had to admit the tow seemed like a better option. I swallowed my pride and did as he said, kneeling at the hood of the car with the chain in my hands. A moment later, the man returned, handing me an open padlock. I noticed he was holding one hand behind his back, which as he stood looming over me, was no good omen. My inner voice was screaming at me at this point that my initial feelings about this guy were right. However, I tried to keep going along with things while still being extra cautious. So I kept one eye on him as I turned away to secure the chain. I only got the lock through one link before I saw him raise his arms over his head out of the corner of my eye. I looked over my shoulder and saw a hammer ready to strike me in the back of the head. I quickly jumped out of the way just before he slammed it into the bumper. I yanked the chain out from under my car, whipping it across his face as he went to hit me again.
He shouted in pain as I ran around to the passenger side, jumping in and locking the doors just moments before he reached the window and started hammering the glass. I crawled over to the driver's seat, praying I wouldn't be stuck. I heard my dad's voice again saying, "Don't floor it." So against my panicking instincts, I feathered the throttle until I felt the tires catch, and then I finally slammed on the gas pedal. I roared out of the ditch, speeding off to safety. The creep didn't come after me, but he smashed my window. When I got home, I called the police immediately and reported everything. But since I didn't have the license plate, they didn't really do much. The rest of my day was very strange, trying to go through with my trip after what happened. It's horrible to think that there's a kind of person in this world that goes around looking for people in need of help, just to take advantage of their vulnerability. I used to work at a 7-Eleven that closed at midnight on Christmas Eve. I worked that closing shift one year. I wasn't supposed to be alone, but my coworker no-called no-showed. The night was painfully slow. After 11:30, no more people were coming in, so I started getting ready to close. I got almost everything done, then I went to count the register. I was about to open the drawer when I heard a faint noise coming from outside. It sounded like jingle bells. As I paused to listen to it, the sound got louder and closer. I looked outside and saw a man dressed as Santa Claus. He was crossing the street, heading right for the store. While he walked, he shook a leather strap of jingle bells in one hand. He was staring right at me, even at a distance and through the glass door. I could tell. He came all the way up to it, then he stopped just outside. He went silent, no longer shaking his bells, just staring at me. He had a strange look in his eyes. It wasn't like a crazy or high person. It was different. They were so empty, yet so full of joy. I looked away at the clock. It was 11:57, so I couldn't bar him from the store. Against my better judgment, I welcomed him in. He opened the door and took one step inside, then stepped on the floor mat. Still staring at me, he made a sudden and unnerving series of deep shouts. Ho, ho, ho! It took me a moment to realize that was his version of ho, ho, ho. It sounded like one of those holiday greeting cards with a worn-out tape recording. Standing in the same spot, he asked what a little boy like me was still doing up. I replied that I was working and the store closed at midnight, but he said I was being naughty and needed to go to sleep so he could put my presents under the tree. I kept being straight with him and said there was no tree and that he needed to buy something. To that, he scoffed and said Santa Claus never buys anything on Christmas. No. Good little boys and girls were supposed to leave milk and cookies out for him. That's when he raised his strap of jingle bells and shook it as he started walking. He took the last cookie on display that I was saving for myself. Then he went over to the coolers. He grabbed a bottle of whole milk, cracked it open, then proceeded to unwrap the cookie and cram the whole thing into his mouth in about 2 bites, washing it down with an entire bottle of milk. I shouted at him that he was going to have to pay for that, but he just glanced over at me and jingled his stupid bells again. After clearing his throat, he thanked me for the milk and cookies but told me that I still had to go to sleep if I wanted to receive my present. I said I wasn't going to play his game and that in 1 minute I was going to kick him out, but he just rang his bells again, then said he could be very patient. We locked eyes for the next 60 seconds. When the clock struck midnight, I told him the store was closed, and without skipping a beat, he started violently shaking his bells and screamed, "Merry Christmas!" at the top of his lungs. I got fed up and went to confront him. I pointed to the door and told him to leave, but instead of listening, he shook his damn bells again and spoke to me like a child. He said he was proud of me for staying up all the way until midnight to see Santa putting out presents, but it was time for me to go to sleep unless I wanted to be put on the naughty list. I finally lost my cool and shouted in his face to get the hell out. In response, he took the strap of bells into 2 hands, holding them horizontally and chest height as he stepped forward to close the gap between us. I started backpedaling toward the register, not taking my eyes off him as he followed mere inches away. I told him he didn't have to pay, but he didn't care. He just told me it was my bedtime. I kept trying to reason with him, saying I still had to close the store. But then the man raised his voice, scolding me for talking back to him. I apologized, but he said it was already too late. I was on the naughty list, and since I wouldn't go to bed on my own, Santa would have to put me to bed himself. And I was no longer going to get what I wanted for Christmas. Before I could ask what he meant, I realized I was backed up against the counter and he was right on top of me. Suddenly, he pushed me down and wrapped the leather strap of bells around my neck, squeezing and pressing into it with all his weight. I kicked and fought against him, trying to pull the strap away, but I was completely overpowered. All I could hear was him screaming, "Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas!" As the seconds passed, my vision faded and my strength vanished. The last thing I remember is him getting in my face and whispering,
Nothing was stirring, not even a mouse.
Then, everything went black, and I could no longer feel. I don't know how long I was like that. When I got up, I called the police. Apparently, the Santa Claus guy had been terrorizing and assaulting people with his demented Santa Claus act all night, but my case appeared to be the worst. I always hoped they would find the guy, but many years have passed, and I haven't heard anything about it.